Yes, we were disrupted.
We have been disrupted.
Yes.
Hooray!
we achieved part of our goal. Boy. Let's try this again. Okay.
The last thing I heard was that you had heard about the innovator's dilemma. You were telling me where you were told about the innovator's dilemma.
Right. So, the innovator's dilemma was written by Clayton Christensen, and he published the book in 1997. And so we got to see the research papers he had done about this before the book came out. So we knew it before it was a thing.
Is the innovator's dilemma like? Was it? I mean, this guy, is he like a philosopher or a psychologist, or was he a technologist, or?
Oh, sure, Harvard Business School scientist. So Clayton Christensen was a member of the Boston Consulting Group, and I think he actually may have done the research while he was at BCG, but he was studying. It was an open question at the time, like why would big companies with lots of money lose to smaller companies with less money?
Mm-hmm.
And the canonical case is the mainframe giving way to the mini computer. So IBM with the mainframe losing out to DEC with the mini computer, losing out to essentially, I guess eventually Dell and Compaq with the PC. And the question is why? And the conventional wisdom at the time was, oh, those people were just stupid. They didn't listen to their customers. They didn't innovate. And Clayton Christensen said, no, that's wrong. The problem is these people are innovating, but they're innovating along the wrong dimension. They're listening to, and they're listening because they're listening to their best customers. So given a market, let's give a cross example, word processors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Word processing, the most advanced users of Microsoft Word are always clamoring for more features. The businesses and the lead users. And so they keep adding features until Microsoft Word becomes this incredibly bizarre, Byzantine, complicated mess. Right?
Uh-huh.
And absent network effects, a simpler solution could come in and compete for that. Now, in reality, there's network effects, there's lock-in, there's all sorts of things that make it hard. But this is why every 3 or 4 years, Apple takes out its current version of a product, shoots it, removes a bunch of features that its most advanced features loves and pisses them off. Final Cut being the most egregious example of this.
Mm-hmm.
Because we really believe this. We believe you should piss off your best customers in order to broaden the market to the next generation of early adopters.
Okay.
Otherwise, someone will say, oh, that old, expensive, complicated solution, let me give you something simpler and cheaper that works way better.
Mm-hmm.
And you target non-consumers first and then work your way up the value chain. And that's how industries get disrupted. And this is why death is such a prominent part of the Swan Factory, is that most people fear death and will do anything they can to avoid it, even in local context. I have this viewpoint, and I really want to assert this viewpoint because because it's rewarded me so much. Right? Acting on this paradigm has been huge. And they see it as immoral to do anything different. It's immoral to give people an empowered computer. It's immoral to, have lower quality healthcare. It's immoral to let kids watch videos to learn something. And it's like, well, yeah, like the debate about college education, right? Kids learn so much more in college than you do from an online course. Yes, if you can afford $50,000 to go to Harvard, sure. But if you're a guy in rural Zimbabwe, Harvard isn't an option. So getting an online video from Khan Academy is way better than nothing.
Yeah.
So typically disruption targets non-consumers. And so there's a whole theory about this, and it's cool. And like all the startups and investors are always talking about disruption, how is Uber disrupting it. And so that's kind of the assumption I'm going for, is that anyone who's read this far is at least likes the idea of disruption. Okay. But more than that, there's sorry, gotta get out of the thing here. There's the idea of a moral imperative. Not just, this is not just a business theory. It is a moral imperative if you believe the future ought to be better and different than the present. Right? So sustaining innovation, taking what we have today and the values we have today and making products that do that more for the same customers, only more so, is essentially a conservative / elitist position. It's saying the existing businesses, institutions, value structures we have are good enough, and we should protect them.
Mm-hmm.
And to be for disruption is to say no. Yes, they delivered a lot of value in the past, but if you really want to expand the pie, serve consumers better, reach more people, and share the wealth, take money away from the rich and give it to the poor. I mean, this is Robin Hood.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This Robin Hood innovation, and that's the linkage between the technical business idea of what disruption is to the mandate. Now, to be fair, and I gloss over it here, but it's something that does haunt me at times. Disruption hurts, right? You are taking away someone who's given their life in good conscience to an existing industry, or business model, or tradition, and saying, yes, I get that, and thank you, but that's just not the way forward. Mm-hmm. And it's building, and in fact, a lot of what we want to do is to try to create a safety net, not a safety net, a trampoline, right? So the people who have been disrupted in the past can find a way to move forward. Mm-hmm. But it is something, and that's why I feel like disrupting us is actually part of the moral imperative. Is we need to make sure we're suffering through the same angst and uncertainty of other people who are losing their jobs, who are finding their existing plans. We've got to empathize and reach out. Mark Andreessen and I have chatted on Twitter, and he says, the real skills we need in the future are creativity and empathy, and I'm way long on human creativity. And I said, yes. Well, I say he's really big on creativity. So yes, well, we need both creativity and empathy. And I am long on creativity, but short on empathy. And I'm still working on it. And so working on the empathic side is an important subtext, which I may or not. For people who are critics of disruption, it's a big deal. Most of the people that we tend to deal with tend to be over-enthusiastic about disruption. So at least that's our sweet spot. We'll see. So here's a hypothesis. If disruption is like the way that people make a ton of money and it's a moral imperative, my question is it possible to design a repeatable, scalable process for creating disruption? If it is possible, that should be worth like $1 trillion, right? If this exists, it is worth dollars. I think we have at least a 1% chance of finding one. And that's the case I have to build. And even if you believe it's 0.01% chance, it's still a pretty good value. Mm-hmm. All right. So the idea is that there are the premise I am starting from is that these 5 elements are the scarce resources. I should call them scarce resources. That's probably a more canonical term. Are the limiting factor on how on creating disruption. And you are not really necessarily critique this. I would love to actually get pushback on this, but this is my starting point. This is the story I've got to tell. We'll see if it resonates with people who actually care about this stuff. One is that in order to get this, but at least see if it's plausible as we walk through it. One is you have to have a novel perspective. I wonder if I should even call it novel values. But the idea is that you have to look at things differently from the way that the incumbents look at it. That's kind of a given.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, idealistic founders. That's something that several people have been talking about. Disruptive innovators are really idealists. They have to believe that the future can be better than the past.
Yeah.
And also, there's a case to be made, which I actually agree with, that all founders of disruptive companies, people who are trying to make the world different, really believe that they are doing good. They may not be good people. Their definition of good may be evil, but they at least are sincere in believing that they're trying to make the world a better place.
All right.
And third, you need a simpler technology. And it doesn't mean necessarily simpler per se, but the idea is that you need something that has a lower cost curve, that you can make better faster.
Mm-hmm.
And simpler is the best single word I can think of to describe that. Let me know if you can think of anything else. Um, different values. Different values than incumbents. Type 2. Sincere, even if mistaken, belief they are improving the world. 3, the ability, a lower cost curve and shallower learning curve. And then number 4 is a bootstrap market. Is a way to start with non-consumers and your way up. So the idea is that you need to have two things. One, a market where there's people there that let's see, and so there's two ideas here. One is you need to find a pool of people who are not using the existing solution, who have enough money. That's right. That's what. So it's who can pay you to climb the value curve. You find someone like that's a good example of a cost-based what's called low-cost disruption. So let's say personal computers. Actually, is a great one. Personal computers targeted people. Actually, interesting story. I actually heard how this worked in reality. The first personal computers were not given to people who did not have access to computers. They were actually given to people like managers in large organizations who wanted to get data from their central computer. And they could get data from the computer. They could submit a written report, probably on paper, it actually would have had to have been on paper, to the IT department, who 2 weeks later would generate a report based on what they thought the request said. And that's how managers got information about their business. And they realized they could buy, and they may even be charged $500 for that service. Mm-hmm. And they could say, I could just go down, buy a PC, an IBM PC for $2,000, pay someone to type in all the printed reports I got from the past, and then I or someone could sit there and play with a spreadsheet and say, oh, this is what it looks like if our sales go up or down. And they could ask questions and get data in real time. And so it was a much worse solution in almost every dimension except for convenience. And it's typically the case that low-cost disruptions are more convenient, and their price per computation is way higher, but the actual raw entry price is much lower. Mm-hmm. And of course, as personal computers got better and better, eventually they started taking over work groups, and then they took over. And now most data centers are low-cost commodity PCs by the thousands rather than mm-hmm. mainframes. Mm-hmm. Right? And people kept, and so one could argue if this really, and so that's the classic thing is that it's worse, but it climbs the value curve. Mm-hmm. That's essential. And then you need you need enough money you need courageous capital, which means somebody you need adventure. You need efficient financing to get over the hump. You need financing that is willing to bet on the invisible. That's the issue, is that on invisible truths. Is that the truth of what is out there in the market today? Sorry, I didn't change my. Right, is you can look at it and say, okay, clearly there is a market here because you have these people using this technology which has these assumptions. And that's an easy thing to say. Yes, I know there's people like this. I can measure it. It's all fine. But what you cannot measure is, as Clay Christensen says, probably not his quote, but the problem with data is you only have data on the past. You have no data on the future. Mm-hmm. And so people who just operate based on ROI and past trends, what's sometimes called the financialization of business, are unable to do these opportunities. If they were rationally visible, then existing incumbents would just do that. That's a sustaining innovation. Mm-hmm. And these truths are not merely unmeasurable, they're also often unpalatable. All right, so here's the pitch, is that I have a theory about how to get more of these. So first you have to accept the assumption that those are scarce resources, even assuming by the idea that disruption is a good thing that we want more of. Mm-hmm. And this is my theory for how you get more. If you want to get more novel perspectives, you need to really recruit for diversity, right? You need to, broaden. You need to really broaden. Break out of your existing worldview and social circles. To identify, in order to see new problems or reconceptualize old ones. A word? I think so.
I don't know.
Let's assume that it is. If not, we'll conceptualize it. Secondly, is if you want idealistic founders, I believe you need to really hire people. So you want to look through all the things to find people who are different, but then you want to choose the ones who have the right values. And I'll talk about what that means. Look everywhere, but marry the ones you trust. Mm. Because it's one thing to say, yeah, we need more diversity, and it's hard to build trust, but you have to build which means you have to build a sense of trust that transcends. Not easy to do wisely when transcending cultural boundaries, right? Because most of our signifiers of trust are deeply tied into our social network, but that's why it's hard. Which is good, right? If something is really hard and painful, that means that most people won't do it, right? Then simpler technology. So to me, this is where the IP question comes in, right? This is the killer concept: is that can we dramatically lower the cost of developing minimum viable products? And that is and that's really interesting for two reasons, right? This is the secret sauce of a vastly cheaper way to create a minimum viable product. And product development is a lousy phrase, but we'll see if we can find a better one before the end. I'm going to go over these in more detail once I get, finish the slide. Fourth is the bootstrap market. And that one is just, this is just hard. So do it more often. Right? Finding the right toehold market that will pay you for disruptive innovation is just hard. And I don't know any clever way to solve that problem other than brute force learning. And there's a wonderful phrase from DevOps. Whatever is hard, the idea of, it's a good digression. Are you familiar with DevOps?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. One of the mantras, I love DevOps and promise theory and a lot of the stuff coming out from that side of the world. But one of the mantras that's my favorite, if something is hard, do it more often. Right? If it's hard to deal with break backward compatibility, break it all the time. Right? Whatever is the hardest thing, do it more often. Because most people shy away from the hard thing, right? This is Mark Andreessen's business partner, who's Ben, whose name I'm
Horowitz.
Horowitz, thank you. Yeah. Duh, Andreessen Horowitz. Yes, I should know this by now, right? The hard thing about the hard things is that they're hard to learn. Well, I said no. The reason they're hard things, there's lots of hard things that people do learn, but they don't. But they do it by going through rigorous discipline and training, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard to run a 4-minute mile. People do it all the time because there's very well-developed training programs for going through that. And the idea is that this is the way to learn, that's the painful way to learn.
Are we jumping back to the presentation?
Oh, yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I don't know if it is possible to train myself to actually learn how to do that. I guess if we do it enough times, maybe we would.
It's hard. Do it more often.
Yes. Yes, that's why you have to relaunch continuously. That means, like, it's just hard. We just do it all the time, and if we survive, we will have learned, right? And then is basically 5 is basically screw Wall Street. Liquid. Oh, I had a wonderful quote about this I need to find. Liquid market in mission, values, and people. We drop that. Is that, the external markets are forced to rely on very crude metrics because they don't have relationships, right? What you really want if you want to disrupt Wall Street and to make, this sort of stuff happen is you need to have a way that people can see and understand the mission of things. They have relationships, and they know what the values are, and it has to be liquid. Right now, you have a very illiquid market in relationships. If you know somebody who trusts you, or if you belong to the right set, then you can get money. Existing markets are because we have to create our own. So that's kind of the idea, is that if you can actually create a pool of people that you understand and trust them and their values, and you can come up with a repeatable process for recruiting more people into that network from a diverse place, what we've already found is that there's people hungry for purpose and meaning that you can recruit into these things at way lower cost than trying to hire somebody off the street in Silicon Valley. But we don't have a process for bringing them in, teaching them disruption, and launching them out into the world. The bet is that we could do that. So that's the experiment. Okay, so here's where we can actually talk about, I believe in this so strongly, I quit my job. I quit the best job in the world at Apple in order to So I loved Apple. It was an amazing place to be. I am so grateful. but I could not make sense of this there, so I had to go out and try in the real world. So this is this. Let me picture a team. But it's just really quite remarkable when you think about, how everyone in the tech has been weeping and moaning about diversity and technology and how hard it is to build a diverse team and a diverse culture. And it is true. If you need a certain minimum level of technical qualification to bring people in, that's really hard. Being a startup and starting with that as our premise, we had this really not something I wanted, because it really is hard recruiting and managing a diverse team, but through a series of miracles, I had people from 4 continents, 5 countries, 6 time zones. Half of them were women, half people of color. Half of them were paid, half were volunteers. And they cover all these backgrounds and platforms. And, it's fascinating. I don't feel like I've done a great job of really leveraging all of that diversity, but at least it's given me a good awareness of just how limited and narrow my perspective is. Mostly talking to David about Windows, because all the stuff us Unix guys take for granted that are so foreign to Windows people really was emotionally challenging to get over.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that's actually good practice for dealing with race and culture and country and gender and all these other issues.
Yeah, I had to do Windows for the better part of this year, working as C# developer. And I think I mentioned it to you, but I did as much as I could in an Ubuntu VM inside my Windows machine because it frustrated me so much.
Yes, when you say the better part of the year, you mean numerically, not necessarily.
Yes, the larger part of the year.
Yeah, it's hard. Oh man, it's hard.
Although I actually really enjoyed the experience, and I think it made me very much, in terms of a technologist and a programmer, the experience has helped me become much, much more well-rounded.
Yeah, it was painful, but parts of it were really good pain.
Right, exactly.
And there are some things Microsoft does incredibly well.
Mm-hmm.
But
I mean, Visual Studio is if you buy into the Microsoft stack, Visual Studio is a pretty amazing tool.
Yeah, no,
They
definitely wrote the book on that, and it tells you a lot about who their customers actually are. That makes you appreciate what they can do when they actually deliver a product for those customers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because those are one of the few places where Microsoft developers and the end users are the same.
Yes.
So their incentives are aligned properly. So the second thing, and this is where we just wear our religion on our sleeve, is that one of the things that really enabled us to pull this off was that we have an extrinsic trust network that transcends culture and geography.
Mm-hmm.
The first 3 members of the team were from Apple Christian Fellowship, and
Mm-hmm.
most of the rest of the team was hired through church connections of various kinds. And this allowed us to articulate a really clear value statement, which we still iterate on. In fact, I need to add listening in here somewhere, maybe even more than empathy. Yeah, but these are the ways that we resolved conflicts, because we had a lot of conflicts, both between members of the team at various points in the early days, and also just internally, with ourselves. What do we do next? How do we decide? And you understand that well. So this is a bit self-indulgent, but I think we need to get it out there as this is what we stand for, and you know what you're buying if you get in with us. And we think that that's actually a really critical part of our success, our ability to execute, is having those values. And this is the one where I'm not sure how to do this or talk about this, but let's get in. This is where all the intellectual property and the hour of node ties into a business model. And this is the picture team. We need something to say here is that the only reason we were able to pull this off is because we have a transcendent community and worldview that allowed us to recruit people and resolve conflicts across cultures. For having worked together before. And probably this is the so there, my primary philosophical difference, too fuzzy. The reason I left Apple is because they rationally viewed programming as a tool. I saw it as a potential product. Yeah.
Can I just throw one thing out actually about the slide before? Just thinking about the way that like I agree with you about the reasons for why the outer node was able to be successful, but I wonder if I would just say in pitching, it would be valuable to, like, I feel like the obvious question is, okay, well, does this mean that you can only hire Christians?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I'm not sure how to answer that one.
Yeah, I mean, and the answer is that we do have people who are not Christians. That's actually a great point. Is we had a core team that shared certain values that they were then demonstrate to a wider group that didn't share that worldview.
Perfect. I mean, that feels much.
Which is a great point, right?
More practical.
We're not Christians, or certainly we're not bought into that whole value system a priori. But that who then, in fact, that was our motto: is that you don't have to believe in miracles, you just have to rely on them.
Right.
And you have to have a core group that actually does believe in the miracles to create them. But once you create them, everyone else just has to say, okay, I accept that, I'll go with it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Great feedback.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, so the idea, and when I say, it's kind of in quotes because you can mean it either way, but the idea is that when you think of a tool, you think of something that is, maybe not complex, sophisticated, probably a better word. Sophisticated versus nowadays, at least. And this is actually a sign of how much the world has changed in the last 10 years, is the idea of an app. I wonder if I should call it an app rather than a product. You still there?
Yeah.
I was thinking about the word product, but really what I call as a product is nowadays what we would call an app, right? Because before, Microsoft Word was the canonical product, which was not obvious, but nowadays we think, at least I think of a product, I don't know if that's just my peculiar perspective, as something that is, it's supposed to be obvious, right? You don't have to be sophisticated to use it. It's not really sophisticated. The obvious functionality is just there. And it's really designed for amateurs, people who just want to do it, rather than for experts. You work with documents, and your primary focus is on the concepts. And critically, it's something that you learn to use, not something you have to be taught.
Yeah.
Is product a reasonable word for that?
I mean, I guess so. As long as I think that the last line is the most significant thing that you said in the what you just said about the difference between an app and a product, is that an app is meant to be learned instead of taught. Right? Nobody's going to write a book, like how to use the Facebook app for dummies. Or how,
I'm sure someone did, but
well, I'm sure someone did, but like it doesn't have the.
They're right. People have written and for good reason, written books on on Facebook for Dummies, because using the Facebook website, there is so much there to navigate.
Right. But I don't know. I think that's the most important I mean, and I think going back to the papers that I read about why the iPhone is the iPhone was I don't remember who wrote the papers, but it was all about this basically single responsibility, that the best devices are the things that only do one thing at a time.
Yes.
And that's the difference between an app and a product. The difference between an app and Microsoft Word is that Microsoft Word does 100 things at once, and you have to learn it. And an app does one thing well.
Right. So we don't even need the quotes then if we can distinguish between tool and app, I think. And I think one thing that I'm not really trying to be coy here, the reality is that the core industrial product is incredibly boring if you're not already a developer. The first version of this deck, I tried to explain all this, and it just lost people. So I'm talking about the benefits and ignoring the features. But a little mystery wouldn't hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Not really a secret when you can view everything on YouTube, but most people. So I need a picture of Hour of Node to kind of show what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then fourth point is relaunch continuously. And we want to be in these iterations, fast cycles. To, this technology allows us to iterate extremely rapidly multiple product cycles and business models. And culture. That's the idea. All right, and this is your question of how does what we're doing now actually fit into the plan? Right? The idea is that what we're doing now is spreading the kingdom of God to our client company by helping them to understand, by demonstrating our values to them and inviting them to embrace those. Mm-hmm. It's a way for us to further develop the technology. That's why I've been giving you grief about trying to figure out how to make this more linguistic,
right,
rather than thing. And I was thinking about that. Is it like, did I just waste your time really badly Friday morning? And I said, well, yes and no. Yes, in some ways, but also because it was actually really useful for me to talk it through with you, starting from your code first, and getting a sense for what did make sense and what didn't. Now I can go back and say, okay, now that I understand where you're at, I think I can come up with a better way to explain it to you, which I would not know without having gone through that. So
yeah,
it's all good. And then the last thing is to invest internally, right? Is that if we could actually generate some non-trivial revenue out of this, the idea is that we just keep doing this better and better each time, and then more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And scaling horizontally rather than vertically. And the other thing that's interesting, which is actually what I should talk about, I got a potential interview at Facebook, and I should mention this to him, is that the other thing I've been studying since 9/11 is the nature of democratic processes. And talking about legacy technology, right? We are running, the world's largest democracy, the world's sole remaining superpower, on basically 18th century democratic technology that was pretty much a 1.1 version, right, of the country, right? With articles configuration, that was, I guess it was a 2.0 version. I think, let's be fair. There was pre-release versions in the Dutch republics and the articles of and the Continental Congress. 1.0 was the Articles of Confederation, which was a disaster, and 2.0 was the U.S. Constitution. And we're maybe at, I guess, 2.1, 2.2, depending on how you count. 2.5, I guess, if you're being generous. But we need, perversely, we need the 3.1 version, right? You want to look back at and there is a lot of interesting innovation happening in this space. In California, there's deliberative democracy. There's a wonderful thesis I want to read. Have you ever heard of 0MQ?
Don't think so.
It's one of these background processing things. Extremely multi-platform. But they've basically, I don't know if I ever told you, yeah, this is the right place for an extended rant, that why I see GitHub as the future of civilization.
I feel like you mentioned it. I'm not bringing up the whole talk right now.
This particular sequence here. The theory is that basically civilization advances as we find new ways of resolving disputes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So religion as a way to say you throw the Urim and Thummim before the priest or a judge. Trial by jury, the scientific method, parliamentary procedure, elections, representative democracy. All of these were key ways, innovations for how to resolve disputes that didn't exist beforehand, and even trial by combat. So the idea is that GitHub is a new way of doing this, and that the idea of forking, and in fact, I've said this for like a couple of years, 0MQ actually built it. When they started the 0MQ project, they realized that they had to do something quick and dirty to get out the door, and then build a community to improve it. So they had two guys working on the code and one guy working on the community process. And he designed basically, I should actually just look this up and throw it in the 0MQ C4, I believe they call it. Let's see if I can get the, yes. This is just pasting in here. Chat message there as well as the slides, is that they basically designed essentially a code for how the community should behave. And there's a couple of things that they highlighted in the talk I heard on, I think it was Ruby Rogues. One is that it's essentially be civil. Mm-hmm. And they have a very well-defined process for, and it's kind of like we talked about how, who speaks for the future, right? How do you measure data that doesn't exist yet? You can say, yes, this person is contributing a lot, but how do you measure all the people who didn't contribute because they were offended and scared off? Mm-hmm. So the idea is having a civil place is really essential. But the other thing is that the way that they resolve conflicts is they do both, right? If one guy says, hey, I want to do it this way, somebody else says, I want to do it this way, you say, okay, do both. Create an abstraction later, you fork the code, whatever it takes, do it both, and then, so first you fork, and then you abstract. So you try to make it so both people can coexist in the same space and try it their own way. I looked at this and said, this is how I imagine legislation working in the future, right? And so and that's just one of the many different things that have been innovated in the last 200 years that are very difficult to shoehorn into an operating system that's running on legacy technology. Different voting methods, different dispute resolution methods, different legal system. It's amazing how many people have asked me, if only you could fix the legal system. And the legal system is just, really badly written, is really arcane source code for a really poorly specified machine. The idea is, and this is actually not part of the original pitch, this is just a nice side effect, is that the goal is you create all these little teams. They're mostly autonomous, but have some shared infrastructure. Shared banking, shared infrastructure, maybe, and then shared intellectual property via a nonprofit. But the idea is, how do you keep autonomous teams working together? Right? Why don't they just opt out and do their own thing? Well, you have to make sure that the value proposition of being part of it is worth more than being a part. And the way you do that is by really taking enfranchisement to the next level, where you really have to have a hollow center, a self-giving center, right? A father who dies so that the sons can live, right? That's got to be the way you design this thing, and this would be a way to prototype that and test it and build it. And the 0MQ C4 process, it's on GitHub too. You can issue pull requests against it just like everything else. You can fork it, right? You can decide different ways of doing it, and they go through that same process like any other code. And if we could build a large-scale corporate structure around that kind of vision that has all the benefits of decentralization, I guess it has the agility of decentralization with the cohesiveness of centralization. Right? That's the hard problem.
One more time.
Let me switch over and write this down because that's the key to doing this is having a self-giving, ego-destroying center, self-giving, consuming center that still carries moral authority, enabling the agility of a decentralized network with the preciseness of a central authority.
Okay.
Right.
Yes.
Right. This is what we're practicing now. Is how do I devolve more power to you? And perversely, the more power I give you, the more I give you wisdom and autonomy and power, the more moral authority I have. Right. The more I give you, the more you trust me.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that I transfer my values to you, the more ultimate influence they have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what I think is a fascinating side effect of this. Anyway, so as I said, if we could pull this off, we really could disrupt everything, right? As a starter, this disrupts startups, the software industry, venture capital. But very quickly, this gets into disrupting capitalism and politics, work and culture. And the best case scenario is we disrupt ourselves, right? That we actually this becomes so good and so popular that someone says, oh, that's lame. I could do better than that. And then they do.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They say, let me try it over here. Let's try it over there. And they disrupt us. And if that happens, awesome. Right? We live to die, and we die to live.
Mm-hmm.
And that is our secret sauce, is that copies us and does it better, we win. Die. We roll. Sorry, that was the slide. So that's the pitch, such as it is.
Cool.
Other than filling in with pictures, any thoughts about things to add, things that are particularly confusing that I should elaborate on? I mean, the goal is, I will probably send this to some people cold. Actually, what I should do is I should first go through it with an outside person as to gauge their reaction, and then I should clean it up and post it on SlideShare and share it with people, cold calling just to see if anyone bites.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I have anything in particular that I would need to see changed. I feel Actually the only thing is that I just felt like the one slide with the table with the two
Mm.
sides against it, I didn't feel like that was very clear when I was looking at it. Like it made sense while you were talking about it, what you were trying to describe, but just looking at the table, I didn't really get it.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let me do one quick fix, and then we'll ponder it more later. You seeing it okay there?
In a second, I'll probably yeah. Now I see it.
Right. Is I wonder if I added a row headers.
Ah,
Right. If I can, that would. Um, let's see how we get the how we apply the table styles.
on the right side, or go back to the table on the right, underneath where you just clicked, it says headers and footers. You can select a left-hand header.
Oh, right. Yeah. Thank you. So the idea is, well, just write random words first. Audience format. Um, revision 0. But that's the idea, is that we have, I don't know if we can get a header for that column or not, or if it needs one. Well, first question, do you think that would help?
I do think it helps. Yes.
Okay.
I still don't. I I still don't really feel like it explains. Like I feel like it just needs some sort of additional text to really, especially the what you mean when you say tool and app.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah,
I
fair
just
enough.
feel like there's just a lot. There's a lot that you mean to say in this slide, and you can say it very well if you get to speak. But I don't feel like that slide is gonna. Um,
Um, what if we call this democratize? And what if we made it this way? It was if the real focus is we're taking technology as something that only experts could do and make it something amateurs could do.
hmm. Yeah, that I feel like that's closer in terms of the quick, one table explanation.
I'm not able to figure out how to move things around. Yeah, there we go. Okay, this is, I think, closer direction. Let's see if the concept is better. Better words for any of these, now that we've got this focus.
Um,
So, fan of complexity, if that's the right triplet here. If there's a
I
more,
mean, personally, I feel like it hinges mostly on like learnability, but you kind of have that in adoption, is taught and
I
learned.
think maybe we have that the I think it was if we should. Why can I not move columns easily? Figure out the magic place to click these things. First click, then drag. Gotcha. Good enough for now, and then we'll sleep on it.
Yeah.
Time this up. No. Okay. Oh no, it's not okay. Change master to this. Better. Okay. Cool. All right, so that's the pitch. Does that give you a better sense for where I'm trying to take this puppy?
It does, and I like it. I feel like this concept that you're trying to sell right now embodies um, embodies the idea of like bringing the kingdom into software, saying right because I think where this hinges and right is to me I think the biggest difference between this on this is trust, or it's what you describe as this sort of predefined, like the reason that we were able to do this is because we had this trust that was sort of outside of, we sort of agreed on this standard, which in short terms is, built by a core team of Christians. But I feel like you're actually proving and making a real good case for how those principles can make good software. And I think that's exciting.
Cool. All right. Thank you. This is I'm glad we got to do this, even if it was fragmented, because I think these are the one, it's kind of the vision we're trying to put out into the world for anyone who's curious, but also talking through. The side note is that I started from thinking about what is it that we want to do, and trying to find what Erica calls a spoon. Erica is our historian who interviewed you, and she showed me her college application essay, which was fantastic. And I said, the bad news is I'm going to hold your writing to a much higher standard after seeing you do this. And I told her, actually, I want a spoon level, and it was about a spoon. It was the central metaphor. It was actually a very deeply personal and impactful story, but it started with this kind of silly metaphor of a spoon. And her last project for the Swan Factory is to write an essay like that about her experience here. But I would always say that after every interview was, okay, you talk to the person, now what's the spoon, right? What's the hook? What's the central thing that pulls it all together? And I think the idea of disruption on the front end and trust on the back end, right? Really, because really what we're trying to do is trying to convince somebody to trust us enough to give us a pile of money and then make us work for it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have to think about whether, and I think that trust really, trust, moral authority really is the scarce resource in Silicon Valley. And so I have to see if I can figure out a way to make that more explicit or make sure it comes out when we go through that. Anyway, thank you very much for sitting through this with me. Yeah. I will go back to your readings on advanced computation topics. I did just post a bibliography on the Swan Factory website, which is actually a good list. Let me post that here in the but you may have seen some of these in passing, but they were never really germane beforehand. So, assuming the internet hasn't died on me.
I know it hasn't died on you because we're still talking.
Okay, good. There we go. But that's some good background reading on some of these ideas and concepts. You don't have to read all of them. You might want to skim a few of them first. And I think towards the scientific theory of programming is where I reference Bitsy and some of the other languages and things like that.
Okay.
Okay, so take whatever time you want on that. And then tomorrow morning, if I don't have any interviews or sick children, we'll try and take another run at the at explaining some of these concepts in a more top-down style rather than inside out the way we were doing it with code.
All right.
All right?
Sounds good.
I think it would be worthwhile trying to do it, actually, as you were suggesting, with some sort of live coding thing. So I can type out some ideas and you can react to them and play with them and counter-propose more easily.
Okay.
So if you whip something up, get us going, that would be awesome. All right?
Cool. Thanks, Ernie.
It has been a joy and a pleasure, as always.
Yep.
Have a great rest of the day.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye.